and automatically it will percolate down the layers. But it has happened to quite an extent, but not much below the desired extent. And entire generations of people take entire few more generations before poverty is alleviated. And people down below in the poverty, low levels of poverty are not going to wait for generations under the assurances that in the future will be brighter. They want the fruits to come to them immediately because income inequality and the glaring differences in conspicuous consumption are a bit too glaring now. Earlier, at least between the top level and bottom level, the differential was lower. Now it is quite glaring, especially you go in other centers, you don't see the extent of poverty. You go to Bombay, you will see an obscene level of splurging on luxury goods in Phoenix Mills and fancy malls. And just outside, below the flyovers, there will be people living in worse conditions than in the most poverty-alleviated countries you hear about in Africa. So the recent literature on the subject is two books, most of you must have read it. It's called Poor Economics, and one more book called Portfolios of the Poor. These are two sets of researchers who have done real case studies in African countries, in India, Bangladesh, and in some South Asian countries, and have got real case studies and number of anecdotes and stories. One is a very telling story. It says about a lady of an SHG group in Andhra Pradesh. She has borrowed some 70 or 75,000 from the MFI at MFI charge rather high rates of interest. This is a 20 or 24% rate of interest. And that 75,000 rupees she has deposited in a bank at savings bank rate of interest. And when asked why she did such a financially foolish thing, she said, no, for me it is very important because now my daughter's wedding will be coming up, which I need at least 75,000 or even more than a lakh. And this money, if I can't keep saving that amount, so at least this is some forced saving where I borrowed and kept it there, even though I have a negative carry on the funds. It's totally against all portfolio management. At least the funds are there. I know it will come. And she is so financially illiterate, doesn't know that she can at least put in an FD of some 8 or 9%, at least narrow down her interest negative margin to at least 10 or 12%. So there's a crying need for both financial inclusion and supplemented by financial education. So coming to brass tacks, now financial inclusion and this buzzword came about through the Millennium Development Goals in 1999, when for the new millennium, 2000 onwards, internationally at the UN it was agreed that a huge number of people below the poverty level should be brought above the poverty level, and it was fixed at some 1 billion during the next 15 years. And glad to say that this has been achieved 5 years in advance. But again, sorry to say that this has been achieved 75% by China. Others only contribute 25%, and India figures quite poorly in that. So we have been into financial inclusion not in the strict sense of the word, with the terminology developed later, but poverty alleviation, Garibi Hatao, and socialistic pattern of society has been there since the late 60s and 69 especially, when banks were nationalized and a number of poverty alleviation developmental measures were put in place through both by government and the Reserve Bank of India, primarily nationalization of banks, then the lead bank scheme, then setting up, and then we found that the banking sector schemes are slightly high-cost islands, and they will not be able to make profits on considering their high establishment costs when they are financing to the poorer segments in the village areas. So the RRB, the low-cost model came, which was promoted by Mr. Narasimhan, who was then governor of RBI. Ironically, in 91, when Mr. Same Narasimhan came up with the Narasimhan Committee report on financial sector reforms, he said, now it's time to abolish RRBs. Anyway, that has not happened, fortunately. Then there was a service area approach, and again, the formation of SHG, especially led by NABARD, and linkage with banks. And then finally, and this all led to quite a lot of development and efforts. Number of branches multiplied from 8,000 plus in 69 to 99,000 plus as of now. And but if you remember, there was an integrated rural development plan, which commonly was known as Inko Rin Dena Hi Padega in the banking circles. It was a government-sponsored scheme. The poorest of the poor are identified, very sensible, very practicable scheme. The poorest of the poor ought to be identified jointly by the government and the banks, and they would be given at that time, I think, 15,000 rupees loan with subsidy from the government for setting up productive enterprises which would lead them to earn income on an ongoing basis and slowly come above the poverty line. This unfortunately failed in India and started to be known by this rather unfortunate name in the banking circles. It was adopted by Sri Lanka at that time and became quite a success there. Same RRB concept, low-cost banking, was borrowed by Mohammad Yunus in Bangladesh. He combined it with this group lending scheme, the SHGs, and became quite an international success and got him the Nobel Prize. However, we discovered it and didn't go anywhere about it. And as there's still, when you count the numbers throughout the, say, 70s, 80s, we kept patting ourselves on the back, saying that the rural branches are increasing by so-and-so percentage, priority sector advances are met so 40%, growing so-and-so percent every year. But the other side of the coin we did not see, that how many, what's the proportion of rural habitations and village levels being sponsored, coming under the banking fold. So only when this financial inclusion and the level of exclusion started getting measured, we found that there are 6 lakh habitations in the country and only 36,000 have a commercial bank branch. So that is only 5% were being covered by the formal banking sector. And about 40% of population across the country has bank accounts. So this again seems fairly satisfactory, but if you see the banking statistics, the 100 top centers account for 75 or 80% of both deposits and advances of banks. So of course the basic primary objective was to take banking to all excluded sections of the society, rural and urban. And 2005 onwards, this was led especially by the Rangarajan Committee report, which went into financial inclusion and gave a large number of findings. This is again derived from the Millennium Development Goals. And we came to a formal definition of financial inclusion, and we decided to implement it on a more structured and more accelerated basis across the banking system. So focus is to provide banking services to all the 6 lakh villages, meeting their financial needs. And what is financial inclusion? It is a package, a bouquet of services to be offered to the customer, consisting of a deposit product with a little bit of overdraft, also a payment system so that he can remit money through the banking channels, and also possibly a micro-insurance product to see that his, in case of any demise, any unfortunate accident, that his, at least his dependents' needs are met to some extent. Because in India we have a huge, like we might not be aware, sitting in our offices, there's a huge load of migrant populations moving all over the country. There are people from Jharkhand who can claim the benefit, the credit for having built the entire Commonwealth Games village. People from Jharkhand are even in Nagaland, Mizoram, building government-sponsored or border roads, organized road projects. And then you see, if you go to these tourist resorts, so once I had gone to Ladakh during the late 90s, I found the set of guys in that hotel. Then they said, no, we move around. During the winter and the summer, we are in Goa when all the shacks are open. Then when summer sets in and tourists start petering out in Goa, and monsoon season, the shacks are shut down. So we move to Ladakh, where the season is starting by June or so, and the season closes down in Goa. So these are all people from different states of India who are struck by poverty. Families are left behind in their hometown and they're moving around India. So if we offer them some sort of formal banking facility with interoperability through CBS, so they can save their money through the formal system and also remit money to their dependents through the formal system, instead of relying on just keeping cash with themselves under the bags or with some other person who offers them some sort of chit fund-like facility or some sort of other Ponzi scheme assuring them rates of interest and also assuring them that he will move cash across from his station of residence to his dependents. So we'll go into a couple of few international experiences in this regard. To start with, Brazil was one of the early countries. Brazil is a country somewhat like us, with a rather diversified population, with an upper class in the cities and a huge tribal population in the Amazon basin in the forest. And its huge land expanses cut off, transportation, communication systems are quite poor. Ours may be even slightly better than theirs. So they, in an attempt to go through, get into financial inclusion, knew that the penetration of banking, formal banking, would be difficult and would be high cost. So they adopted more or less a BC model, correspondent banking model, to expand reach of banking services to remote areas. Again, BC model equipped with ICT facilities, point of sale terminals, so that in remote villages this correspondent will have the facility to accept cash or even make cash payments, and also remittance facilities for the people in order to help them to send the funds across the different networks. And along with this, side by side with this, the government implemented two programs. One is that one known as Bolsa Familia program. It is again a sort of a direct benefit scheme. And this cash transfer scheme for subsidies is borrowed from them. So this is based on some family attributes. So once a person has, say, a child, he gets some money. Then the children are given the basic inoculations and health checkups. They are given some more money. When he enters school, he or she, then they get a grant. Then the child passes primary school, they get a further grant. So this is incentivized payments to see that development of children takes place, nutrition is met, and schools also provide nutrition. Then side by side is another one called Bolsa Sem Miseria, which is again for the poorer segments of society to give them some investment avenues which will bolster their levels of income on an ongoing basis. Kenya was a different model. This was based on a mobile operator called the M-Pesa scheme. So here the mobile operator operates like the banking correspondent. So the money is loaded onto the mobile. If I have this Vodafone mobile, I go to the Vodafone recharge shop or kiosk and I give him 1,000 rupees, he'll load it onto my system. So the Vodafone has my account. Similarly now when I want to spend it, I go to some retail outlet, it's used like a credit card. I give him the mobile phone, he connects it to his terminal, and I have to pay 500 rupees for purchase of retail articles, 500 rupees gets debited to my account. This has been a success in Kenya because they had only one mobile operator. We, with our multiple mobile operators and our requirement to keep with KYC, AML, international direct guidelines, and widely spread out economy, we felt that pure mobile network banking would not be feasible. So we at least enrolled these people, brought them in on board along with us, and the number of transactions up to certain limits, it's been gradually increased. And now I think it's around up to 50,000 can be remitted using mobile phones through the banking system. But you have to be attached to a bank. You can't operate on a pure mobile-based system. Philippines again started this both banking in partnership with banking and a mobile network operator, MNO. They operated this system in one segment and another purely mobile-based operation in other segment called the GCash. So these are a bit of international statistics, so I thought I would display. So number of bank branches per population, India scores quite badly, and number of ATMs, again we are quite poor. Data for United States, Korea we could not get. Bank deposits, bank loans as percentage of GDP, we seem quite high up on the pecking rate. But again, as I told you, this is concentrated more in the larger segments. Still 40%, only 40% of the population or households have access to formal banking network. So definition of FI we already dealt with, and India, it is a bank-led model to introduce a bouquet of products related to savings, payments, and credit. And other intermediaries, technology partners have been enrolled as common service providers for acting as a force multiplier to expand the reach of banking. Still see to expand the brick and mortar banking throughout all the 6 lakh villages. It's quite an impossibility in the next 2-3 generations. And it's also a high cost model. So we leveraged on technology using this BC model so that BCs could be spread all over the countryside, and the typical BC would serve around 4 or 6 villages in his command area. He'll be attached to his branch, parent branch, and he should be having a point of sales terminal or another say a laptop. And he will go around the centers and collect money and allow withdrawals of money and facilitate the entire system. Of course, but with our large widespread network of villages, communication problems and power, other problems, has still been a bit of a hassle in getting these people operationalized. Then the other model, of course, was the SHG bank linkage, which has been